When you walk in the streets of your city or in your neighborhood, what is the language that you hear people talk? Is it a language of love or is it a language of noise? This is the question I want to ask, because this is what Paul writes to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. In verse 1, he's writing to them and he says, I will show you the most excellent way. And then he says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Now, whenever I hear the words a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, I'm reminded of many years back in 2006 when I attended my first church camp. And we were a few young men sleeping together in a big tent. And what would happen the following morning, very early, before sunrise, someone would come with 2 steel pots and he would bang these pots against one another. And the sound, or let me rather say, the noise from these 2 pots being banged together was so horrific that the first thing you want to do is you just want to run away. You want to escape this noise. Why am I saying this? Paul says to the born again, to the Christians in Corinth, he says, you have become a clanging cymbal. You have become a resounding gong, like these 2 steel pots banging together, because you have no love. What happened here is they speak in tongues, the tongues of men and the tongues of angels, but they had no love. And I did a word study on this word tongues, and the Greek word for tongues in verse 1 is glossa, and it means a natural language. And this word glossa you will also find in Acts chapter 2 verse 4, when the Holy Spirit was poured out on the day of Pentecost in the upper room with 120 believers, and the believers started to speak, and it says they spoke in the tongues of men. They spoke the languages of nations and people groups that were present in Jerusalem. And the interesting thing we see there in Acts chapter 2 is that the language united the people groups. It says, if you continue to read in Acts chapter 2, it says that the people were amazed, they were bewildered, the NIV says, because they heard the good news of Jesus in their own native language. What happened there? What's the difference between Acts chapter 2 and 1 Corinthians chapter 13? Is love. Love brings together. Love unites, like this language unites around the good news of Jesus Christ. But Paul says, you have neglected love. You speak in tongues, but you actually make more of a noise. People are actually rejecting, they are actually distancing themselves from you because there's no love in your heart. Secondly, he writes and he says, if I speak in the tongues of angels. Now, what does Paul mean when he writes to them, if you speak in the tongues of angels? Well, I think it's the enabling power of the Holy Spirit to speak in a language, to speak in a tongue, which is only understood by God, because it's a language given by God. So I'd like to end off by asking again, when you walk in the streets of your city, when you speak to people, what is the language that you are hearing? Is it a language of love that unites people, or is it a language of noise, like in 1 Corinthians, a language without love? I trust that it will be that love would increase and that fear would decrease. Have a blessed day.